Hello, everybody. My name's James. Welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Club World Cup. Well, today, at least. And today, and all of this week, I'm flying solo. Yes, myself and Suj have many clashes this week in terms of work and personal commitments. We're going to try something a little bit different this week, where I'm going to be hosting all of the content this week. Tomorrow, a little bit of an FPL podcast for you. Going to be looking at opportunities when to do a first wildcard. There'll be an Ask James stream on Wednesday. I'm going to look at current transfer rumours and completed deals on Thursday, and there'll be more Club World Cup chat for you on Friday. What I'm going to do today is have a look through all the key talking points from match week 2 in the Club World Cup, where Brazilian clubs continue to perform very well. I will tell you openly, honestly, as predicted after the first set of games, that I've watched less than what I did in the first set of games, but probably a little bit more infused about the tournament. And I think it is, yes, primarily because of the performances of those Brazilian clubs. I'll be discussing plenty of that on today's podcast. Can I have a run through of what's been happening in each group for you? We'll go in letter order. So, Group A kicked off in match day 2 with a victory for Palmeiras, who beat Our Lee 2-0. That game was another one that was interrupted by weather conditions and also saw Anthony Taylor sent off Rafael Veiga. That decision was overturned. Interestingly, I don't think Taylor was too happy about getting his first decision completely incorrect. He was right to overturn it and give it as a yellow card. It was one of the rare ones, though, where I actually appreciated the way he described things. I'm not keen on this VAR where the referee then speaks. I know some people are. I'm not. It feels a bit cold to me. I almost know what's going to happen with the decision. I feel like we're just wasting more time personally. But I think Taylor's explanation of why was pretty good. They've got a player, Richard Rios, who's been linked with a number of Premier League clubs at the moment, performed quite well in midfield. And Chelsea fans would have been intrigued, I think, again, by the performance of Esteval. Still no goal in the tournament for him. He did have one mazy dribble in the first half and shot narrowly wide. Palmeiras highly likely to be qualifying to the next stage of the tournament, and so too Inter Miami following their victory against Porto. I did watch all of this game. And Porto really probably should have been out of sight, despite the fact Inter Miami had set up a little bit structurally better defensively, certainly in terms of transition, didn't leave themselves quite so open to the counter attack as they had in the opening game against Our Lee. But having equalised early in the second half, they then won it through this beautiful free kick from Lionel Messi. And if you're anything like me, I think there's joy in seeing Messi still do well. I don't get the joy out of watching him like many of us would have back in the Barcelona days, but that's because he can't go with quite the speed and guile that he used to back in the day, obviously. But you'll never change away the technique brilliance that he's got in his play, and it's a stunning free kick. Keeper's position a little bit questionable, and maybe should do a bit better. I think it was nice for the tournament and also the MLS teams who hadn't performed particularly well, that Messi scored the key winning goal for Inter Miami. And they're now highly likely to progress. The two teams on 4 points in that group play each other, Palmeiras and Inter Miami. And Porto now essentially need Miami to win to have a chance of qualifying. Our elite also need Palmeiras to win and obviously win themselves. So the top two are on 4 points with the bottom two on 1 point. The first criteria to separate teams is head to head. So if Palmeiras win, Porto are out no matter what they do, for example, because then the head to head, if they land on 4 points with Inter Miami, would obviously favour the MLS side. And interestingly, in terms of that group as well, with that final game, Palmeiras and Inter Miami, I think we should consider the possibility that that could just play out to be a draw. Not that I think particularly the South Americans will play that way, but Inter Miami may well think that that's the right thing for them. That's because second place will obviously play top in Group B, and that might not be Paris Saint-Germain now. So I watched all of Atletico Madrid's victory against Seattle. Pablo Barrios scored two brilliant goals. I was left somewhat annoyed by Atletico Madrid's second goal because it's not just Sky and TNT that cock things up with their production. So Marcus Llorente had a brilliant long range strike that was tipped onto the underside of the bar and bounced down, and the ball's bouncing in the 6 yard box. And the TV production decided to zoom into Marcus Llorente's face as the ball was scrambling around the 6 yard box. Cut back, and Axel Witsel was heading into an empty net. We obviously need a replay to find out how that happened. So not just the UK production that wants to zoom in on players too much. I cannot stand that replays while the game's been going on or zooming in on particular players. Why do you want to? Anyway, I don't know why you want to do that. And then obviously woke up the next morning to find out that Botafogo had beaten Paris Saint-Germain with a goal from Igor Jesus. And the Brazilian side defended absolutely brilliantly. And I think waking up to that news the next morning really was an eye opener because the Brazilian side has obviously started well, but to beat, I mean, Paris Saint Germain, I think almost unquestionably are the best side in the world at the moment. Yes, they rotated players a little bit. That's a stunning result. Luis Enrique said that the Brazilians were the best team that they played this year in terms of how well they defended. PSG had zero big chances in the game. And probably came as no surprise that that morning as well, news broke of speculation that Brazil's interest to host the 2029 version of this tournament. Suj and I have had conversations on Patreon, kind of stressing concerns, well, not concerns as such, but the idea that there's every possibility this tournament will be played in the United States again in 2029 because I believe it's where FIFA believe that they'll be able to maximise their revenue despite concerns about attendances. With growth of the tournament, I think we can expect probably more than 32 teams in the next version of this. I would not be surprised if it's 64. There's every reason to think that it would perhaps be in the United States again. There's interest from Spain, Portugal, and Morocco in terms of hosting the tournament. I think many are assuming that's probably what will happen because obviously US, Canada, Mexico have got the international version of the tournament next year. And those three countries are the primary hosts of the 2030 International World Cup. But Brazil's interest is intriguing, and I think FIFA should consider that because these clubs are clearly the clubs that are treating it the most seriously at the moment and obviously performing very well. Atleti will need to win by 3 clear goals if Paris Saint-Germain beat Botafogo. Atleti face Botafogo in their last game. Again, this will be down to head to head. So if all three teams finish on 6 points, then it will be the goal difference in the games between those three teams that will be deciding factor who finishes first and second. That would obviously put Atletico in a really bad spot, having lost 4-0 to Paris Saint-Germain. So we need to win by at least 3, basically, to qualify. Obviously, Botafogo just need a point in that game to confirm top spot. And that's where I said, although Botafogo would be heavy favourites against Inter Miami, with that group finishing before Group A, it wouldn't be a huge shock to see Inter Miami potentially play out for a draw against Palmeiras or even be not that bothered if they got beat. As long as obviously our Lee are not winning the other game in the group. In Group C, I watched all of the first half of Benfica against Auckland. Didn't watch the second half because by that point I was watching Flamengo against Chelsea, and that game finished later than Chelsea's game. There was a weather delay in this game of over 2 hours. It's the third game interrupted by weather, and the second consecutive one, I think, certainly the second game anyway, in Orlando. There are warnings that this will happen in 2026 as well. I'm quite intrigued to see what will happen if there's a weather delay in one of the games of the final group games, because obviously all the games are scheduled to kick off at the final time to make sure no one's got an advantage. What are they going to do? Hold up 2 games at the same time? Doubt it, but they could do, I guess, in theory, if they're that insistent. I've certainly been very keen in previous tournaments, FIFA, to have that second half even kick off at the correct times. Some games having like longer or shorter halftime periods to make sure that happens. It was only 1-0 to Benfica at halftime of what I saw. And the plucky part timers from New Zealand had performed quite well. Nathan Garrow came into the side in goal and was performing heroics. In fact, Angel Di Maria's opening goal from the penalty spot came essentially in the 5th minute of added time in the first half. Benfica would go on to get 6. And literally, when Suj and I discussed this last week after the first group games, I literally posed the question to him, what do you think will happen if Benfica win by 6. And I said, yeah, Boca will win by 7. Well, that's probably now what they've got to do following their defeat to Bayern Munich. The only caveat to this is, of course, Bayern don't need to beat Benfica. And again, this is one where a draw could suit both sides. Benfica obviously then claims second spot in the group, and Bayern would be confirmed as group winners. There's the possibility that it plays out that way. And one intriguing aspect for Group C as well is that their afternoon kickoffs and the temperature for these two scheduled games in Group C is likely to be in excess of 36 degrees. Yeah, expect plenty of water breaks. Not ideal to be playing football in that particular heat, and this tournament is likely to get hotter from a climate perspective as well. Bayern beat Boca 2-1 through goals from Harry Kane and Michael Elise. Boca's equaliser was brilliantly converted by Miguel Morentiel. Absolutely super goal, worth having a look for if you haven't seen it. So Boca will need to win by 6 or probably 7 and hope that Bayern beat Benfica. In that circumstance for Boca, it could then be an Argentinian against a Brazilian clash because Flamengo are confirmed group winners of Group D following their excellent victory against Chelsea. Flamengo are on 6 points now. Chelsea and Tunis from Tunisia, both on 3 points. Chelsea just need a draw from their final group game to qualify. Lots of talking points from this Flamengo Chelsea game, which I did watch in its entirety. The Brazilians started at a really quick pace. Many of these good performances, if you think of, say, Botafogo against Paris Saint-Germain, quite a lot of them have seen really good counter-attacking displays. Flamengo were quite keen to go and press Chelsea and harry them. There was some, I don't want to say excessive tackles in the first half, but it was pretty physical. Flamengo pretty intent, as said, not to let Chelsea breathe. And Chelsea had changed tactics somewhat as well. Looks a little bit more like a 4-3-3 system. Chelsea normally play with kind of 4 out and out attackers, and then move into obviously a shape of 5 further up the field. It was more of a 3 with Cole Palmer and Pedro Neto, who scored again behind Liam Delap. Maresca spoke afterwards and told DAZN that it was a formation with next season in mind, which is not to offer out any excuses for Chelsea's defeat here, but it's quite interesting and quite telling, I think, about the mentality of some of the clubs in this competition at the moment. And Chelsea are obviously still highly likely to qualify out of this group, despite the defeat. So that's something possibly to note for Chelsea in terms of tactically next season. Nicholas Jackson came on for the lap and quickly found himself sent off. No excuse. Pretty horrendous tackle, this one. I tried to explain away and offer a little bit of defence for the red card he had at Newcastle when going up for a challenge. I think it was against Sven Botman. And described at that point the fact that Jackson was putting his arm out almost to kind of block. And at that point, Botman bent his legs to go up for the header. It was obviously going to be a red card because you end up obviously forearm smashing the player. Certainly once VAR look at it, VAR wouldn't have needed many looks to confirm this one. It was given as a red card on field by the referee immediately. And you can't even explain it away, this Jackson one. It's one of them where he's gone over the top of the ball and it's obviously made contact with a straight leg. Obviously pretty dangerous tackle, kind of shin height, if you will. But sometimes you see those ones. I think of Curtis Jones was sent off at Tottenham a couple of years ago in the controversial game where Luis Diaz had the goal disallowed. And I don't think that tackle was on Bissouma and it's going to be a red card. And I spoke at the time and I thought it was a red card. But I think with him, he was trying to just kind of manage his body over the top of the ball. Jackson goes so far away from the ball that it's difficult to even make an explanation for what he's trying to do. So I think some players try to step over the top of the ball to shield, and then if a player comes quickly, that contact can happen and it can look really bad. With Jackson's, he's going so far over the top and away from the ball, it's not even clear what he's trying to do other than just try and take out his opponent. So he'll serve a 3-game suspension. I know as well Rico Lewis' suspension, I read, has been increased to a 3-game ban, even though he was quite unlucky to be sent off in Manchester City's first game. So Chelsea had led through Neto's goal in the first half, and this Jackson red card did occur when Chelsea had already gone behind, kind of a mad 5-minute spell where Flamengo equalised and then got in front quite quickly afterwards. Then there was a Jackson red card and obviously got a late third as well on top of that. It felt when Flamengo equalised, it reminded me of how you feel sometimes as a fan, where you go to a really difficult away venue and you equalise, and then you can feel the momentum is with the home team. And obviously, some of the support for some of these Brazilian clubs, particularly, is absolutely outstanding. And when Flamengo equalised, you could feel like a momentum shift, like it was a home versus an away match. And actually, you could feel the second goal coming for Flamengo. So, look, good side. They're now fifth in the betting overall, actually, behind the big four of PSG, Bayern, Man City, and Real Madrid. Not content with just their victory, their admin went on one after the game. This is in response to being baited by some online Chelsea trolls on socials, on Twitter, and also in response to a Chelsea tweet after Chelsea had won the Conference League about the lion always being on top. Well, Flamengo's admin went on a bit of a tear up after the game. These are some of the tweets that were put out. When the lion dies, the vulture will become king. Chelsea's just a small neighbourhood in London. I personally would have preferred they'd gone with bus stop, because then it's something we could have sung. Neighbourhood doesn't really go into a song very well. They also took aim at Cole Palmer, saying too hot for cold Palmer. And where did all the Chelsea fans go? In response to some of the baiting pre-game, these tweets were deleted quite hastily, but yeah, they went on a bit of a tear up. What's kind of cool about this one is, obviously, unless the two teams meet in the final, what's the chance of Chelsea ever getting their revenge against Flamengo? Not much. And John Obi Mikel was also absolutely losing his mind on DAZN's coverage of the game with Chelsea's performance. Wasn't happy at all. Kept calling Flamengo Flamingo as well, which didn't particularly help. As said, Chinis Esperance won the other game in the group. That was despite LA having a 99th minute penalty that was taken by Dennis Bugara, saved by Beshin Ben Said. So Esperance go into the final game playing Chelsea, a level on points. Obviously, their goal difference is one worse. So Chelsea just need a draw to go through. They cannot win the group. Flamengo, the only side confirmed of their position in terms of qualification for the next round at this stage. They're guaranteed top spot in Group D. In Group E, Inter Milan had to come behind quite late to beat the Japanese side, Rara Red Diamonds. That if you haven't seen Lautaro Martinez goal, that's also worth a look. A little bit of an overhead kick from a corner, which takes several looks to work out how he manages to do it. It's a brilliant creative finish. That was also, I believe, Inter Milan's first shot on target. They won the game in injury time for goal from substitute Valentin Carboni. So left it pretty late, and also potentially left themselves in quite an awkward spot for the final group game as well. They'll play River Plate. The Argentine side drew 0-0 with Monterrey, and the Mexicans had also obviously drawn with Inter Milan. There is the prospect here for the top three in this group to finish on 5 points, with Arawa potentially finishing on 0. And if Monterrey win by 2 and Inter draw, they'll be the side that would go out under that circumstance, or even a big 3-2, for example, victory for Monterrey by so a big kind of goal scoring by 1 goal could mean they'd even leapfrog Inter Milan in the event that River and Inter drew. And the draw could still be enough for River Plate to top the group under that circumstance as well. So real pressure on Inter, who are now managed by Christian Kivu. Just a few notes from that River Monterrey game that I thought were quite interesting. I didn't watch the game, but Monterrey, the Mexican side, actually had 59% of the ball, despite only having 3 shots to River's 18. And it was quite an interesting quirk that those who've watched Monterrey's first 2 games may well have noticed as well. In both games, they've had free kicks that they've conceded in quite central areas, sort of 25 yards from goal. Now, obviously, what most teams commonly do here is set up with one wall. What Monterrey had done is set up with two and split and allowed the opportunity to shoot straight through the side. So rather than protecting one side of the goal and goalkeeper standing to one side, they used walls to protect both sides and had the goalkeeper looking through the middle to try and see the ball. Of course, what happens here is the opponent obviously sets up their own wall to try and block the goalkeeper's vision as well. But on either occasion, they didn't concede. And it's actually, I'd read in the piece on The Athletic, it's something they commonly do and first did back in 2022. Some of you may also seen from this game something going around on social media with a Boca fan. Yes, a Boca Juniors fan. They obviously have a huge rivalry with River Plate in Argentina. A Boca fan in the middle of the River Plate end, getting ushered out by security as River Plate fans go through him. At one stage, a member of security actually pulls the Boca Juniors shirt off of this chap to try and protect him, because once he's been spotted, you can imagine what's going on. I don't know how it's happened, if he's just walked in the ground and this has happened immediately, or he's thought this would be a fun thing to do and get on socials in the middle of the game. Not advisable. That was at the Rose Bowl, where River once again, again, like many of these Argentinian Brazilian sides, had really strong support. In Group F, I didn't unfortunately manage to catch, and I had wanted to catch Mamelodi Sundowns against Borussia Dortmund, and the South Africans, who I said looked like a little bit of a knockoff Brazil after the first game in terms of their kit, looked even more Brazilian in this fixture once they've got light blue shorts on. And true to form, I didn't know this legitimately, but one of their nicknames is actually the Brazilians. And they dominated from a possession point of view again in this game, moving towards sort of 60% possession. I realise that game state may well have had quite a bit to do with this, but they really are quite flary, basically, in terms of how they want to play on the ball. And they scored this absolutely outstanding goal from Lucas Ribeiro, where they'd played with the ball deep, gone to the goalkeeper, played out, sucked in the press, played through it, and then Lucas Ribeiro just literally paces through, gets one on one from sort of 40 yards out, and then has this brilliant composure at the end. It's an absolutely outstanding goal to give them an early lead. But they did soon, sort of into the early parts of the second half, manage to find themselves 4-1 down. Joe Bellingham was amongst Borussia Dortmund's scorers, scored their third. An interesting note, obviously, Mamelodi did manage to pull it back to 4-3, which they deserve mass credit for. Again, kind of highlighting some of the concerns about some of the temperatures that are increasing out there. Borussia Dortmund's substitutes in the first half did not watch the game in the dugout. They watched the game in the dressing room to shield themselves from obviously the hot weather. The other game in the group was won 4-2 by Fluminense against Aurora Red Diamonds, although the Brazilian side did find themselves 2-1 down. They did open the scoring for this absolutely outstanding free kick from John Arias. Really worth having a look at from a free kick perspective, because he arches his body. Technique very similar to, if you remember how Yaya Toure used to take free kicks, he used to arc his body, almost lean away from it, and he used to whip over the wall. But if he went around the wall, he used to completely arc back and almost whip his foot around it, making it look like there's no way he would shoot to that direction. It's an awesome free kick from Arias. And again, I think the momentum, once Fluminense had equalised, a better side. And obviously, again, great support. Although the Japanese side have been supported very well as well, Urawa. So that leaves the group with Fluminense on 4 points, Dortmund on 4 points, Fluminense one goal better than Dortmund, who they face in the final. No, they don't face in the final group game. Mamelodi face Fluminense. Sorry, Mamelodi on 3 points. So I mean, Dortmund would have to really cock this up to go out, despite being second place in the group. So they face Urawa in the final game. Obviously, draws Fluminense and Dortmund respectively would be enough to see them qualify. And with Group E a little bit up in the air in terms of how that looks at the moment, and the fact that that group goes on later, I don't think either side will be particularly playing for any particular spot in terms of first or second in that group. In Group G, which is Manchester City's group, Juventus beat Wydad 4-1 yesterday, included a couple of great goals from Kenan Yildiz. The second really neatly worked and a lovely finish into the bottom corner. The first is an absolutely brilliant strike where he's running onto the ball. It's one of them beautiful ones. It's struck really pure. It's kind of on the half volley and the ball's just rising. It's going in like an arrow, just going upwards all the time. Brilliant goal. It's a nice 4-1 victory for Juventus, which left Manchester City needing to win the Abu Dhabi derby against United Arab Emirates Al Ain by 7 goals to mean that they'd only need a draw against Juventus, and they only got 6, despite very much going all out. In fact, Bernardo Silva admitted in an interview after the game that it was discussed at halftime that the target was 7 goals to make sure that they'd only need a draw in the final group game. The City really did go all out to try and get that 7th, couldn't quite manage it. Couple of really nice goals in the game. Heavily changed side for City from their first game, by the way. Claudio Echeverri, who you might remember came on the FA Cup final, took and scored a brilliant free kick. And Ryan Cherky got a lovely goal off the nice link up with Erling Haaland. Haaland scored a penalty, only one of City's six. An interesting stat on the big robot is that's now only one goal in open play from his last 11 appearances for Manchester City. So both sides, Juventus and Manchester City, confirmed through to the next stage, both obviously on 4 points. And we did stress in our preview of the tournament that those two teams could likely feel very comfortable about their chances of progression. Both have a +8 goal difference, but Juventus have scored one more. So City need to win in that final group game. City is 8 o'clock UK time on Thursday night against Juventus. In Group H, Real Madrid beat Mexicans Pachuca 3-1, despite Raul Asensio being sent off after bringing down former Premier League legend Solomon Rondon after only 7 minutes. You may remember Asensio also gave away the penalty in the first group game against Al Hilal. But Madrid strolled through this. The Mexicans had plenty of efforts in goal, on goal. I think it was up to 11 on target, actually. Thibaut Courtois had to make a number of saves, but it was fairly routine for Madrid in their 3-1 victory. Goals from Jude Bellingham, really nicely taken goal for Madrid's first. Arda Güler and Valverde. Interestingly, as well, from Pachuca, when tweeting Real Madrid's second goal, they put in capital letters "Golazzo" after the goal. Don't know why. Also, another a tweet that was deleted. Also, a little note from this one as well. After the game, unfortunately, Antonio Rudiger alleged racism report against the captain of Pachuca, Gustavo Cabral. Those of you who've seen the game perhaps aren't aware of this, might know right towards the end of the game, shortly before the final whistle, the referee held up an X message, and that's what that is to instigate. So if you see a referee doing that, that's what they're instigating, is that there's a report of racism has been submitted to the referee. I did catch the other game last night, which finished 0-0 between Salzburg and Al Hilal. And the Austrians, I felt, a little bit unlucky not to win the game. Bono, the Moroccan goalkeeper, performed really well in goal for Al Hilal. They have some outstanding individuals. Malcolm also could have won it for the Saudi Arabian side. A 2-goal victory for Al Hilal in their last group game would guarantee progress. Obviously, Madrid and Salzburg face each other. They're both on 4 points. Al Hilal on 2 points. This group could obviously land very similar to Inter Milan's group. You could have three teams on 5 points and one on zero. But quite nice, I think, that the only club absolutely guaranteed like a top spot in their group from the opening two games is Flamengo. And I guess much of the theme of this at the moment is just how good are these Brazilian teams. One of the things I'm interested to see in the latter stages of this tournament is, will the brilliant support that they've had so far, not just them, but also the South American sides, and actually some of the Asian sides, and also I think Monterrey from Mexico, how well will they be supported in the latter stages of the tournament? Suj and I have discussed on our Money in Football podcast this dynamic ticket pricing that's going on in much of the tournament at the moment. And I don't think that these supporters are finding it too difficult to get into the grounds at the moment. In the latter stages of the tournament, what's the expense going to be? Have these people planned to be out there for a month? Now, the support for some of these clubs is absolutely incredible. All I just note is that the kind of home support vibe that they have at the moment might not feel quite so strong in the knockout stage as it does in the group stage. I hope it does, because the colour and support that they're bringing to these teams is making these games the most intriguing at the moment. Bayern and Benfica, might, yeah, two European teams, great, or Juventus against Man City. You don't particularly appeal to me, despite them being the top two in those two groups going into the final games, because I know the atmosphere is just not going to be competitive with what it is for particularly those South American clubs at the moment. And those games that don't feature them at the moment feel a little bit soulless at the moment. These are the most enjoyable games because they feel competitive. Even if the stadiums aren't full, which they're not in many of these occasions, you're getting kind of hardcore support behind the goals, which is really helping these sides. And it's definitely given them a little bit of advantage. So, in terms of trying to equate at the moment how good, particularly the Brazilian clubs are, because all four of them top their groups at the moment, I think there's four kind of key points to really consider at the moment. One is the climate. So I've mentioned already about the heat at the tournament. We're going to get a Bayern Munich's group, particularly like I said, I think the games are tomorrow afternoon, is going to be really excessive in terms of the heat. Now, Boca Juniors will play Auckland aiming for 7 goals. I don't know if that's a help or a hindrance. We'll possibly find out tomorrow in terms of the volume of goals they need. But you imagine it'll be hard work for Auckland trying to defend them, right? I imagine Boca will hit that total unless they're aware that Benfica are getting a positive result against Bayern. Climate's definitely a help. I don't think there's much doubt about that. I spoke on our Patreon Q&A last week about real concerns about England playing in these conditions next summer, and just being brutally honest, England don't tend to do well in hotter conditions. I think it's one of the reasons many of us was so hopeful in Germany last summer because the conditions were far better suited. I'm not saying it was cold, but it was a lot of heavy rain in Germany. It certainly was nothing getting towards 36-degree temperature anyway. That's too hot for football, really. And I do think it's an ongoing concern about summer tournaments. I suggested that I felt that the 2030 International World Cup tournament might well be the last summer tournament held. Now, there's no will or want to move it from summers, but climates may well have an impact. We've seen over the last few years temperatures in cities such as Madrid and Seville get into sort of like the mid 40s. You can't really be playing football in these conditions. We know obviously the Qatar World Cup was moved to a winter tournament. We had air conditioned stadiums. The 2034 tournament's going to be in Saudi Arabia. It's highly likely to be in winter. So if that's in winter, and I think we can all say actually the product of the football at the Qatar World Cup, whether we like it or not, was a pretty good tournament actually in terms of how enjoyable it was. And that helps because I can't see Bayern and Benfica, like there's next to no chance of it being a thriller. It's too hot to have high intensity football. And I think that's what most of us are drawn towards. So the climate is helping. I don't think when it gets to that temperature, I don't particularly helps anybody, but it's not ideal for the Europeans. It's a massive jump up to what they're used to. Perhaps not so much for perhaps certain sides, maybe like Madrid or Porto, perhaps. But certainly for clubs in kind of the northern parts of Europe, so the English clubs, it's not ideal. Not ideal at all. The timing of the tournament has been mentioned as a reason why Brazilian clubs could be doing really well at the moment. And then I think this narrative can be spun either way. Because if you actually look at games played by club teams in the tournament over the last 12 months, you'll actually find that the Brazilian clubs have played more than the European clubs in this tournament. But to what level, quite often, is one question. I can't say I've done the research to look. I think Flamengo have played 75 odd games over the last 12 months. How much have they rotated over that period? Not sure is the honest truth. But what we can say is that they're in the middle of their season at the moment. Whereas the European teams obviously finished their season, little bit of a break, moving on. Some like Inter and PSG obviously got to the Champions League final, have had kind of very little break. Some will have been kind of strolling through what they were doing. Real Madrid were not going to win La Liga, so I feel like probably haven't played competitive, excuse me, for quite a while. So the timing is helping, but I would say in terms of the volume of games, we'd possibly have to question more about the intensity. Because if you look at the data, the Brazilian clubs are playing quite a lot. The support is also really helping, as I've said several times over. This is in certain games giving clubs a kind of home advantage feel. Certainly on what I watched, that Flamengo Chelsea game, the game could have been played in Brazil. That's how it felt watching the game. It was very, very clear that Flamengo had a massive advantage in terms of their support. And we're going to see some other games like that, for example. So you would wonder, just as kind of a note, like PSG in the last 16 could end up playing Palmeiras, and it could be a 12 p.m. UK time kickoff, 12 p.m. American time kickoff, right? Could be really hot. It's not ideal and could feel like an away support because we're playing against Brazilian opponent, and Palmeiras are likely to have a massive advantage from that perspective. So that might not even be a gimme for Paris Saint-Germain under that sort of circumstance. I said, I'm intrigued to see if this support lasts if they go deep in the tournament. And I absolutely hope that these South American sides really do. And I think the fourth and final point on questioning how good these Brazilian sides are at the moment, on top of climate, timing, and support, is the motivation. The motivation aspect. I was listening to Kleberson after Flamengo, who used to play for Manchester United, was obviously Brazilian, after Flamengo beat Chelsea, and he stressed that his belief was that the South American sides have been setting up to peak for this. I don't think many of the European sides have. Maybe someone like Salzburg has been looking at this as kind of the most important part of their season, but I don't think that's the case for many of the other European clubs. And I think there is a process here. It's worth saying that European clubs may well peak later on, seeing many circumstances where teams look absolutely incredible in the groups and then they hit the knockout stages and they've peaked too soon. I think of the Netherlands, Euro 2008, that's a really good example. Absolutely demolished France and Italy 3-0 and 4-1 respectively in the group stage and got torn apart by Russia in the quarterfinals. Peaked a little bit too soon. And that might be an element of that in the group stage at the moment, where many of these, like even Chelsea have lost to Flamengo, they're in so little danger of going out. The Tunisian side are more than 10 to 1 to beat Chelsea and knock them out in their final group game. But Kleberson said the motivation of these South American clubs has been to hit this moment as their peak. And you can believe that. It definitely appears that it means so much to them. Consequence of the intensity that they're playing with, and the support is obviously helping as well. It means something to the supporters. I don't truthfully know at the moment if Chelsea and Man City fans are that bothered by what's going on. I'm sure Chelsea fans are not happy with the defeat against Flamengo, but in the grand scheme of things, they're probably going to go through. The most likely now is they're going to play Bayern Munich in the last 16 rather than playing Paris Saint-Germain in the quarterfinal. It was always probably going to look quite rough for them. It's worth saying if PSG finish second, it could be that it's Bayern Munich and then PSG for them, I believe. So I think the motivation is clearly there for the South American sides at the moment. It's worth mentioning that until this tournament, no South American team had beaten a European team in a competitive match since 2012. Now, obviously, there wasn't many opportunities to do that. But when the Club World Cup and its former guise was also played in winter, a little bit more helpful from a climate perspective, the European side had won every game since Corinthians beat Chelsea back in 2012. Was it Corinthians or was it Santos? Can't remember. Chelsea lost that final to a South American side. So that's why I think many of us thought, well, there's definitely a disparity between the quality of Europe's best and South America's best. Now, in many of these cases, European clubs aren't at their best. Sujan and I discussed prior to the tournament about you look at it and you think there's so many European teams here, with all due respect, that could have been in this tournament that would be better than Porto, Salzburg, Benfica. I don't think it's a great Dortmund, for example. I don't think Real Madrid are at their peak. Chelsea have seen better days and are beatable, right? We've seen that throughout this season. There's inexperience in that Chelsea team importantly at the moment. So the motivation of the South American teams is definitely there at the moment. Will that motivation increase for the European sides once there's greater jeopardy? That's important. Once the jeopardy's there, does that change things? Many of the top European teams are obviously used to playing at this high intensity jeopardy. For these Brazilian and Argentinian clubs, these games feel obviously absolutely huge. The motivation might be a small advantage, but will that motivation be the same once we hit the knockout stage and then the European clubs can potentially smell the glory? Difficult to say. I mentioned earlier that Flamengo are now up to fifth in the betting with the bookmakers, but that's quite a drift from the big four of PSG, Man City, Bayern, and Real Madrid. But the bookies now rate Flamengo with a better opportunity than the likes of Juventus or Chelsea of winning this trophy. And yet, the projected quarterfinals, as it would stand, still has 6 European teams. So projected quarterfinals at the moment would be Palmeiras against Bayern Munich, Inter Milan against Manchester City, Paris Saint-Germain against Flamengo, and Borussia Dortmund against Real Madrid. And under that circumstance, therefore, the projected final four would still be that big four. Now, there's things that can happen in these final group games, such as Real Madrid finishing second in their group, Paris Saint-Germain finishing second in the group, that could really open up the draw to one side or another. There is the prospect of two South American sides potentially meeting in a semi-final, for example. And as I said, I very much hope that they do. I think the whole principal idea of this tournament, and we're biased here in Europe, or I am, many of you listening will be Europe, but I bet those probably from around the world probably have a little bit more intrigue in this. This is good for football, I think, that we don't have this complete power shift just towards European teams. Because many of us grown up on stories of people like Maradona playing for Boca Juniors and Pele at Santos, and these kind of legendary status of some of these Brazilian and Argentinian clubs, particularly. So to see him doing well, I think is absolutely great for the tournament, and it's good. I think it would have been really bad for this tournament if it had just been European teams just completely dominating. And at the end, that might still be the case, but I think the tournament's running quite nicely at the moment. Despite me having little interest in it, as said and predicted, I felt I would have less interest in this second group of games than the first. Now, there's personal interest in that in the sense I went away with the family for pretty much the whole weekend, right? So that's why I didn't watch many of the group games on Saturday and Sunday. But then when I consider, for example, games tomorrow night, so the afternoon games tomorrow, 8 o'clock, Benfica, Bayern Munich, 8 o'clock UK time in those very hot conditions out in America. Yeah, I'll be watching England under 21s in the semi final, the under 21 Euros. Will be holding far more interest to me. Well done to the under 21s who beat Spain at the weekend. That's what I'll be watching Tuesday night. Won't be watching Bayern Munich. I'll be watching England under 21s. And that's personal to me because I've got an invested interest. And I've got no invested interest in this Club World Cup personally, other than I want Paris Saint-Germain to do quite well because I want them to rock up with a weakened side against Tottenham in the Super Cup final on the 13th of August. I did note that that was a team all in white in Botafogo who defended well and beat Paris Saint-Germain 1-0. Yes, Thomas Frank, we'd take that. But I've got no vested interest. I've got no team support, no interest. I'm not watching any of the games. I want you to win more than the other. Other than, like I said, there is a little bit of a kind of a will to get behind, particularly some of these South American sides at the moment. Give us a bit of vibrancy and something different. Also, Benfica, I say Benfica and Bayern, I wouldn't watch it over the under 21s. I tell you what, if it was Boca against River Plate, I'd have a decision to make. And that's how I feel about the tournament at the moment. So I'd certainly got touch wood that the South American sides and the others from around outside Europe continue to progress well. I think it'd be good for the tournament. Because Suj quite rightly said, the idea of the tournament in principle is a good idea. I think there are probably at the moment too many good clubs that are not involved. It doesn't feel to me like you could truly, whoever wins this, truly call them. I know it's been kind of defined as whoever wins this, they're the best team in the world. If Flamengo or Boca do win it, they'll claim it. That's fine. The best team in the world for me at the moment is Paris Saint-Germain. Ultimately, it's a cup competition, and the cup competition doesn't always win the trophy. Although Paris Saint-Germain did in Europe, despite what Mikel Arteta thinks. I think in principle, it's a good format. It's a good tournament. As it'll probably increase to 64 games, and then therein lies the problem: it's too much football, and that's the excuse for the European clubs at the moment. There's too much football. It's they're there for the money, and the money is keeping them interested and invested in this at the moment. Although it was interesting to see City try really hard throughout the late hours of the night, try and get that seventh goal to claim top spot last night. It would be interesting to see if they care more at the latter stages. But I don't want to downplay the excellent performances from the South American side so far. Okay, that's all from a roundup for Club World Cup second group games. As I said, I'll be doing another pod on Friday on the final group games, discussing all the key talking points from the tournament over the next 4 days. As I said, I'll be doing an FPL podcast looking at potential opportunities of a first wild card. It looks like, at spoiler, it's probably something we should hold back a little bit later this season. If you listen to the audio, 5-star review goes a really long way. Hope you've enjoyed this format. I certainly welcome feedback if you do like it. You didn't like it. I don't intend to be going solo very often in the future, but it is something I do quite a lot on our Patreon network. For those of you watching on YouTube, please do drop a comment, smash a like, hit the sub button. And for the benefit of those listening to the audio, cue music, please, man child.